Hi everybody, this is Bastiaan, and today we're going to take another look at the old Benoni, namely a variation called the Clarendon Court. And to demonstrate, I'm going to show you a game I played against an 1800 player. So I'm playing black. The game starts out with d4, and I play c5, the old Benoni. And in this variation, white doesn't capture on c5, but instead continues to play d5. So now what? One variation that black can try is f5, the Clarendon Court variation, and one of the purposes of this move is that it prevents the immediate e4, which will strengthen white's center. White continues with bishop to f4. Now, one possibility in the old Benoni is that black plays queen a5 with a check, because the diagonal has been opened, and so has the diagonal to white's king. However, with bishop to f4, we can already see a weakness on b2. So instead of queen a5 check, I'm playing queen to b6, targeting the weakness immediately. White responds with queen to c1. And now knight to f6. So we're developing the knight a little bit in the spirit of the English opening, where it has some protection from the advancing pawns. White plays c4 because of the threat of knight takes pawn on d5. And I play g6. So the reason why g6 is played is not only to defend the pawn on f5, but also to fianchetto, because I'm targeting the pawn on b2. So I'm developing in a way to continue the pressure on b2. White plays knight to c3, which already blocks the diagonal to b2. So I continue with bishop to g7, knight to f3, so white is developing both knights. I castle first. White plays e3, which frees the bishop and also defends c4. And now I play knight to e4 to free up the bishop and in some cases take on b2. Now there's a little trap here. If white takes on the knight, let's say knight takes knight, which wasn't played of course, I can recapture it, pawn takes knight, and I get an attack on the knight on f3, and also I'm threatening a fork on b2 between queen and rook. So it's not that easy to get rid of the knight on e4. Of course, I'm threatening to capture on c3. White has to play something else and plays bishop to e5, blocking the threat of my bishop on g7. So I take, white recaptures, and I have lost my attacking idea on b2. So I need a new type of attack to continue. We're still threatening c3. So I play the original idea, queen to a5, adding more pressure on c3. White plays bishop to d3, perhaps hoping to exchange minor pieces. Knight takes knight. Pawn recaptures, because of course, well, if queen recaptures, queen takes queen, pawn takes, and the problem with white is that he ends up with doubled pawns if he chooses to exchange queens or not in doing so. So already we're seeing I am getting a little bit of a positional advantage with a better pawn structure. Now it's time to develop the other minor pieces, but both squares are blocked for the moment or threatened. So d6, which immediately chases away the knight, frees up d7 for both bishop or knight. Knight retreats, and instead of developing a minor piece, I continue to take control of the center with e5. And this frees up more space for my minor pieces. But also, if white recaptures en passant, which wasn't played, I can recapture with the bishop, and we can see white is getting two isolated pawns, doubled isolated pawns, which is good for black. So e5 was played. White doesn't recapture, instead plays knight to g5, and I continue with e4. So now we're seeing I haven't created doubled isolated pawns. However, the pawn structure of white has become isolated and is very weak. So there's no way for white to defend his pawns with other pawns, threatening the bishop on d3. So the bishop retreats, and I continue the development as planned of my minor pieces, knight to d7. White gets a knight behind my ranks, threatening the rook, but there's no real danger to it. Rook to f6. White castles. Now knight to e5, which not only develops the knight, but creates an attack on white's knight on e6, threatening to win a pawn. Queen to b2. This overloads the bishop on c8, which is now attacking the knight on e6 and defending the pawn on b7. So I decide to take on e6 anyways. So pawn takes bishop takes knight. Pawn takes bishop to recapture the minor piece. And now I could play b6 to prevent the capture of the pawn on b7. However, this traps my own queen out of the game. More sense is to play queen to c7, protecting the pawn. And there's no real way for white to prevent capture of his pawn on e6. White creates a battery on the b file. So now b6, which prevents the pawn, but without the queen being locked out of the game. Rook to d1, creating pressure on the backwards pawn on d6. So the rook is going to the half open file. Rook takes pawn. Queen to b5. Now I'm continuing with a third attacking idea, that's rook to f8. So the threat is to push the pawn on the f file and create batteries with rooks and queen. White plays h3, preventing, among other things, a knight jump to g4. f4 is played. Pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn. Rook to b2, which will eventually protect f2. So I'm continuing the battery with queen to f7. Bishop to f1. And now I need to get my third piece in. Rook to f6. And we can see that white's queen is no longer able to defend because it's locked out of the game. So white's queen is poorly placed on b5. White plays f3, but pawn takes. And now of course it's a mistake for white to recapture with his own pawn. Let's say if g takes f, then play could continue with knight takes pawn check, king h1, then knight to e1, threatening rook takes bishop on f1. And if rook takes knight, rook takes check, rook recaptures, rook takes check. So all that black has to do is stay off of the second rank. King to f2, queen f3 check, king to h2, rook h1 mate. So taking on the pawn is a bad move by white. This wasn't played. Pawn to g3, attacking the rook. But black simply advances. Pawn f2 check, king to h2, rook f3, getting the rook into safety, also threatening the pawn on c3 among other things. Rook to d2, so white is creating a battery of his own, but there's little threat or tactical advantage on d6. Rook takes pawn, rook takes pawn. Now f3 has become available. Knight f3 check, king h1, rook takes d6, rook recaptures. Knight to d4, threatening the queen. White plays the in-between move, rook to d8 check. So king goes to g7. Now the queen has to move to d7. So we're seeing the queen coming back into the game, but it's too late. Rook takes pawn on g3. There's no rush to exchange queens. So queen takes queen, king takes queen, king h2, threatening the rook, but rook to g1 traps the king on h2 and threatens knight to f3 mate. So after the in-between check, rook to d7 check, and king to e6, white is forced to take out the knight on d4, so rook takes knight, pawn recaptures, and after this move, white resigns the game. So I hope you enjoyed this variation of the old Benoni called the Clarendon Court. Thanks for watching and have a great evening.